Medaka Kurakami, the strongest protagonist in history, versus Satoru Gojo, the strongest protagonist of today. This battle is the literal definition of an unstoppable force versus the immovable object, and in today's video I'm going to be discussing what would happen if Medaka were to fight Gojo and who would win. Before the video starts, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and comment if you would like to support me and the channel, or if you enjoy the content. And with all of that being said, let's get started with the video. Now, when it comes to discussing Gojo, especially in cross-verse matchups, the main thing to talk about is his Limitless curse technique and seeing if the opponent can or has any type of way to bypass it. But before we can talk about that, we need to know what exactly the Limitless does. So to start, we know that in JJK0, after Gojo uses Reversal Red to destroy a random curse, Miguel states that Gojo's manipulation of space is on an atomic level. Because Red is an application of Limitless, then it should be safe to assume that Blue and his neutral Limitless Infinity should also work on this level as well. And the way that the neutral form of Limitless works is by constantly dividing the space between Gojo himself and the opponent infinitely, making it so that the opponent can never reach him. And in a chapter extra, Gege says that the numbers that are involved in the Limitless, like for the example of 0, is fictitious, basically saying that his actual application of the move is real as we see in the series, but the numbers involved in the move are just fake. However, there are some things to take into consideration when talking about the technique. The first thing is that Gojo's Limitless relies partly on his perception. Many people are under the impression that the Limitless can just stop things from approaching Gojo all by itself, but that's not necessarily the case. While Gojo is talking to Shoko and Geto, he specifically says that he no longer needs to manually turn Limitless on and off, and can now have it active automatically, and even has an automatic targeting option for techniques. What's important about this is Gojo saying that he can distinguish the threat of an object based on the intensity of its curse energy, its mass, speed, and even shape. And while the Limitless can distinguish these things as well, Gojo also uses the word I in his explanation, which shows that he is also the one that is distinguishing what does and doesn't go through Limitless, and that it can stay up with minimal resources. There have been instances in the series where Gojo hasn't been looking at something, and Limitless does stop things from attacking outside his view. This just goes to show that part of it is automatic, and Gojo can also use his own perception alongside it. But why is this important? It's important because that means if you can blitz Gojo's perception, then you can bypass the Limitless. This is obviously done through speed and is one of the ways to neutralize Gojo. Another way to get past this ability is through hacks, and this can come in many forms like distorting or warping space, having attacks that don't even need to travel and can instantly spawn on Gojo, and much more. So now that we know what Gojo's Limitless is and what it can and can't do, let's talk about Gojo's AP and see what type of damage he can dish out. When talking about Gojo's AP, there are many different ways you can scale him, and they all depend on what meta you use. There's the low ball scaling, which is anywhere around the building to town levels of power, from Jogo's maximum meteor calc, which is around the small to large town levels of power. Although if you don't like calcs and would like to use what's shown, then you could scale this feat anywhere from small to large building and even multi-city block, from the move's charge up to its detonation. There's the mid ball scaling, and this is around the island levels of power, from Dagon's domain expansion, which he creates a seemingly island-sized domain with his curse energy. And since Dagon was able to create this with his own power, and Gojo blatantly scales above him, then he should also scale to this level of power shown as well. Then there's the high ball scaling, and this is around the planetary levels of power, and there are some arguments used for it. The first planetary argument comes from the chapter extra statement regarding Sukuna's fingers, in which it stated that if a curse were to eat his fingers, they would gain the power to destroy the world. And since these are just Sukuna's fingers, and even at just 1 and 2 fingers, he's already classified as a special grade curse, and completely destroys a finger bearer with said finger, and Gojo was also blatantly above both of these versions of Sukuna, so he would upscale from this as well. But the problem that comes from using this scaling method is the context of the statement itself, as we know that the world in this sentence doesn't actually mean the planet, but instead means civilization or society, which is why as soon as Sukuna manifests in Yuji, he immediately talks about killing women and children and just terrorizing people in general. But for the sake of this video, we'll just say that this is in reference to actually destroying the planet. The second scaling method is from Yuki's black hole feat, feet, and just as the name suggests, Yuki was able to create a black hole at the end of her fight with Kenjaku, but the important thing about this is the fact that the black hole was being heavily suppressed by both Yuki herself and Tengen's barrier, meaning that it actually wasn't at full power and wasn't planetary in its destructive capacity. But again, for the sake of this video, we'll just go along with this and say that this is actually a planetary feat. And that's everything regarding Gojo's AP, so now let's go over his speed and see how fast he actually is. As with his AP, there is a low, mid, and high ball scaling that he can scale to for his speed. Starting with the low ball being somewhere vaguely above Mach 3 speeds, with Gojo being above both Curse Naoya and Awakened Maki, who are both around this level of speed. Although Gege has admitted that having Curse Naoya be around this level is silly and inconsistent, but this is just one way you can scale his speed. Next is the mid ball, and this is around the massively hypersonic plus levels of speed due to upscaling from Kashimo, who has lightning based attacks and can fire off an arc of lightning that is compared to that of a can't miss attack, and Hikari was able to dodge out of the way of this at near point blank range, which again Gojo scales above. And then there's the high ball scaling, and this comes from the arguable light speed feats from Curse Technique Kashimo and Sukuna. Immediately after Gojo's defeat, Kashimo begins to fight Sukuna and activates his Curse Technique Mythical Beast Amber, and it's stated that Kashimo is able to utilize electromagnetic waves, which when in a vacuum or in outer space, move at the speed of light. But because he's using this within the atmosphere or on Earth, the electromagnetic waves are actually moving slower than the speed of light. And this is because they need to travel through a medium's refractive index, and this is very dependent on what that medium is. For example, if it's traveling through the air, air's refractive index is somewhere around 1 or approximately 1.0003, so this would be slightly less than the speed of light, with the refractive index formula looking something like this, with V being the speed of light in the medium, or air in this case, C being the speed of light in a vacuum, which is approximately 299,792,458 meters per second. So doing the math, which is something like this, and converting the answer to kilometers per second, this would approximately be 299,703 kilometers per second in the Earth's atmosphere. This would mean that the feat is 99.97% of the speed of light and is actually in the relativistic plus range of speed, and Sukuna is able to dodge an attack from this Kashimo while not only heavily injured, but from point blank range as well. And then when he goes into his true form, he then starts to repeatedly outspeed Kashimo, which Gojo should also be able to scale to by some degree, or if you want to just throw science out of the window and believe this feat to actually be FTL, then that's fine and Gojo could scale to this level of speed too. But that's everything regarding Gojo and his abilities, so now let's go over the student council president, Medaka Kurakami. So when it comes to scaling Medaka, we actually do need to rely on things such as Calcs, since Medaka doesn't have many blatant feats that show us just how strong she actually is. So just like Gojo, I'll go over her low, mid, and high balled scaling so you can get a grasp of how strong she actually is. Starting with her low ball, during her battle with Unzen while she was being trapped by his strings, she was able to move the entire part of the school that she was bounded to, and depending on how you interpret this, can scale various different ways. If you think that the structure of the school is made out of concrete and you get the length, width, and height of the school, along with the hollowness of the walls and the fact that Medaka was walking while moving the school, the math comes out at around wall level plus. But when trying to also factor in Medaka's durability during this feat and the durability of the strings, with the thickness of said strings being comparable to the width of human hair, and when going on the assumption that there are somewhere around 3,000 strings, you would then get a calc that would be around small building level, which can also be considered a low ball for this feat. Another way to calculate this feat would be off of Unzen's durability, since he says that after the explosion went off, he was preparing for much more damage than what Medaka was able to offset, which you could possibly interpret to be the entire wing he was in, since that's what he makes note of. And because Medaka said that Unzen would only be able to take 3 of her punches at full power, this should mean that Medaka should scale to around 1/3 of the school's destroying calc, which when factoring in would be around city block to multi-city block levels of power. Next is her mid-ball scaling, and this is her moon level scaling, which is actually pretty blatant. After defeating Lahiko, the moon was hurling towards the planet, and Medaka decides that she's just going to go and destroy it. And in the next panel after, the narrator states that after that day, no one has seen the moon in the sky since. For more proof of this, there's an alternative volume cover where it literally shows her destroying the moon, so this would shut down the notion that she either didn't actually do it or that it took multiple hits to do so. Then for the highball, there's the star level scaling, and again, this is another very blatant feat. When Ajumu Najumi's afterimage appeared to talk to Kumagawa, she was able to one-shot a star in outer space. Medaka actually has higher scaling that can go up to universal and possibly even higher, but if you all would like to see a video of me going over Medaka solo and her higher ends of scaling, then please leave a like on this video, and if this video gets enough likes and does well, then I'll gladly make a solo Medaka video for you all. And so with Medaka's AP covered, let's go over her speed next. She actually has a speed feat during the first chapter of Medaka Box where she's able to blitz multiple students with afterimages and basic kendo movement, when including things like Medaka's pickpocketing of all the students and also grabbing and using her fan to stack up all of the cigarettes on top of it, which would also include her arm movement, and factoring in humans being able to perceive up to 120 frames per second. This feat is somewhere around Mach 13 in speed, or in simpler terms, hypersonic plus. There's also her Kurakami Phantom, which is a technique that allows Medaka to move at light speeds, but there are some things to consider when talking about this. Firstly is that Medaka has different variations of the move, with one of them being described as the quote-unquote proper version and is said to save on speed, with the other one being described as the complete one or usual version, where she's not holding back her speed at all. And during her fight with Lahiko, she activates Kurakami Phantom, and right as she does, she proceeds to get blitzed by him. It's generally been said that in order to blitz a human being, and in this case an anime, you need to be at least 7 times faster than the opponent to do so. So if you apply this to Kurakami Phantom, then that means that Lahiko during this time was 7 times the speed of light, or FTL in this case. And then later on, when Medaka uses Kurakami Phantom with the aid of a style and she blitzes Lahiko, this would be another 7 times blitz and make her 14 times faster than light, or FTL plus. And then later again, when she uses Kurakami Final, she's able to use a shadow clone to remove air resistance to her speed, and since her speed and power grow proportionally, with Medaka herself stating that it increases in multiples, with multiples generally meaning at least 2 times. If you count every panel of Medaka moving during Kurakami Final as 1 second, Medaka would have been getting in at least 2 times amped to her speed every second for around 12 seconds, and this would actually come out to a 4,096 times increase in speed, and would actually mean that Medaka during this was moving at MFTL plus levels of speed, which would actually explain this massive blitz she performed against Lahiko. Keep in mind though that Medaka was heavily injured and not even at her normal level of power or speed, but she also turned her entire body into a heart, pumping blood all throughout it, which was stated to increase her physicals massively, meaning that if she was at 100%, she would have been even faster. But without a doubt, Medaka is definitely in the light speed ranges considering all of this. And with all of that being said, let's talk about her hacks and abilities. Medaka's main ability is called The End, and this lets her pretty much copy almost any abilities that she either gains knowledge of or sees from the opponent. But we all know that the 6 Eyes and Limitless are extremely special and can only be used in conjunction with each other, so Medaka wouldn't be able to copy any of Gojo's techniques. But that's not an issue, as she has other things that can definitely be of huge help during the fight. She has her War God mode that gives her a significant increase to her stats, primarily her strength, with Medaka basically being able to one-shot Unzen, while in her base she couldn't do that. Then there's Altered God mode, and this allows Medaka to basically be at 120% of her power, and this even applies to her abilities that she has as well. Next there's Forsaken God mode, and this makes Medaka forcefully weaker than her opponent, and is stated that no matter how much weaker the opponent is, she will always, no matter what, become even weaker. Then there's Hybrid God mode, and this blends her Altered God mode with her Forsaken God mode. So basically in this mode, she's weaker than her opponent while also being at 120% of her power. And then there's End God mode, which is essentially her peak, and she uses every ounce of power that she has against her opponent. She also has other abilities like Weighted Words, which is basically like Curse Speech in JJK. She has the ability Encounter, which is a minus ability that pushes away any type of damage from Medaka, and this damage can include physical damage, emotional damage, and even mental damage as well, alongside pushing away death. She also has Scar Dead, which allows her to reopen any old wound that the opponent has ever received. Ice Fire, which allows her to manipulate her body temperature to create fire and ice. Mr. Unknown, which basically gives Medaka unreal physical strength. Autopilot, which is basically like Ultra Instinct, and Medaka can auto dodge attacks without thinking and can turn her reflexes on or off at will. Then there's All Fiction, which lets Medaka rewrite reality and make anything nothing. Then there's Bookmaker, which allows Medaka to utilize screws that when hit the opponent disables any and all of their abilities and equalizes Medaka and the opponent, making it an equal stats hand-to-hand fight. She also has access to all of these abilities that are on screen right now. And with all of the scaling out of the way, who would win between Medaka Kurakami and Satoru Gojo? Let's go over this. This battle is pretty interesting to talk about when discussing both of the characters' lowball scaling. Gojo would actually be stronger than Medaka due to him scaling anywhere from the city levels to town levels of power, and Medaka ranging from wall level plus to multi-city block and AP. And then in terms of speed, if you still believe in the Mach 3 meta, which Gege himself retconned and doesn't agree with, since Gojo would be much faster than Curse Naoya and fully realized Maki, he'd be somewhat above Mach 3, although by an unquantified degree. With Medaka scaling around Mach 13, she'd have the speed advantage over Gojo, while he'd have the AP advantage. But then there's Infinity, although it shouldn't be an issue since Medaka has abilities that can counter it. With Bookmaker, she can instantly spawn screws on Gojo himself, as we see Kumagawa do against Medaka, and this would allow Bookmaker to disable Gojo's 6 Eyes and Limitless curse technique, and would make their fight an equal stats hand-to-hand battle. And if it came down to this, I have Medaka clearing Gojo with not much difficulty. Medaka has been stated to have a red colored obi, and for those that don't know, this is only awarded to those that are 8th Dan and 10th Dan practitioners of judo, and she has this at only high school, showing her advanced mastery of the fighting style. She's also extremely skilled at kendo, with her using the basic footwork of kendo to create clones through just raw movement speed. She also has really great skill in karate, aikido, taekwondo, muay thai, wrestling, and many more. She also has autopilot, which lets her turn on and off her reflexes and allows her to auto dodge and attack without thinking. So if it comes down to just hand-to-hand combat, she will definitely press Gojo and beat him. This isn't even including her different god modes or even her other abilities she has, which can make his Limitless useless during the fight. The one thing I could possibly think of that could give Gojo the win is by putting Medaka in character during the fight and having her allow Gojo to attack her first. It is in character for Medaka to not attack the opponent first, and if this is the case, if Gojo was able to land a hollow purple or a domain expansion because he thinks Medaka is a threat, then this would definitely work and could actually beat her. Otherwise, she will literally outstat and outhacks him very easily with pretty much no difficulty. So in the end, there is a possibility for Gojo to win if Medaka allows Gojo the opportunity to attack first and he starts off with his big moves. Otherwise, in any other scenario, Medaka wins. Thank you all for watching the video, and don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed the video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.